Why is the shopping cart always in the top right of the screen?
How do companies predict my purchases?
And why do prices end in 9?
Why do fast food companies use red and yellow in their logos?
Why do restaurants always have one expensive menu item?
Researchers, marketers, and very curious people seek the answers for how we make decisions and how we choose products. Clicksuasion finds the secrets that companies use and shares them with you.
Why do I feel better when I bought the last remaining airline ticket?
How do I make choices based on colors and fonts?
Welcome, everybody. This is a very special meeting of the Behavioral Economics NYC meetup. I'm Brett Wiesel, and I'm going to be your temporarily unintroverted MC for tonight. Not sure how long that'll last, because I did like networking all day today, so we'll see. So a few quick words about our meetup. Our mission of the Behavioral Economics NYC meetup is to welcome everybody with interest in behavioral economics to gather and learn about the theory and practical applications in an accessible and free format. Ground rules are respectful and thoughtful dialogue. We clean up after ourselves. We change our RSVP if we're not going to show, and I think we're really unusually good about that. Tonight's format is kind of an experiment, so thanks in advance for your patience if it explodes. I don't think it will. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get started. Our event tonight is about applying behavioral economics to an important problem facing our community and many cities and towns across the developed world. So landholders have been slow, we'll learn more about this, to participate in subsidized programs to build green roofs and other green infrastructure that could reduce the overflow of sewage in rivers and lakes when it rains. So tonight we're going to brainstorm some ideas to fix this problem. And our host, the Nature Conservancy, will take the best of these ideas and work to implement them. That's pretty cool, right? I think it's pretty awesome. Yes, it's really, yes. This is being recorded, folks, so yes. Okay, so here's how it's going to work, just really quickly. First, Nina Chen of the Conservancy will give us a brief introduction to the design challenge. Our expert panel here, whom I will introduce shortly, will briefly share their observations, analysis, and suggestions to help you all meet that challenge. At about 8 o'clock, it'll be brainstorming time. We'll give you a few minutes to ideate on your own. You'll gather into your assigned groups. There's a little box on the upper right corner of your instructions. That's your group. You'll have, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so until 8:30 to come up with some great ideas. You'll designate a spokesperson. Come back, the spokesperson will explain your brilliant ideas. The Nature Conservancy will consult with the panel, designate a winner, confer some fabulous prizes. I'll have some brief closing remarks at the end. So, any questions? No. Totally confusing? I'm confused. Okay, all right, so let's start. So let's get started. So let me introduce Nina Chen, right there on the left. She's Director of Conservation Investments at the New York Division of the Nature Conservancy. She's responsible for leveraging and creating the enabling conditions for private capital and innovation finance to accelerate and scale up conservation impacts in New York. She focuses on healthy cities, climate resilient infrastructure, and climate mitigation. Please welcome Nina. Yes. Okay. So please tell us about the challenge you have for us tonight.
Thank you so much for coming tonight and spending time with us. Let's just show of hands. Anybody likes raw sewage in your rivers and lakes? Nobody? We don't like that either. But unfortunately, in many cities around the country, including New York City, Buffalo, in these old cities, we're still using a technology that was invented by the Romans. The 3,000-year-old technology called combined sewer systems. And what it does is when we rain, first, obviously, it collects the raw sewage from your homes, offices, and so on, and convey that to the wastewater treatment plant. And at the same time, the same system also collects rainwater or snow melts and convey, we call that stormwater once it falls onto the impervious surface like roads, parking lots, and then also convey that to wastewater treatment plants. So it's combined. In newer cities, these two systems are separated. The beauty of the combined system is that you don't have water that's following the roads that pick up the dirty chemicals or the oil waste. It gets treated before it flows into the rivers and lakes. And the downside of that is our cities have always outgrown what our wastewater treatment plants have designed to build. So when it rains, and in places it might just be 1 inch of rain, the system overflows, and then you have the dirty stuff that we don't want to see going into our water. EPA has strong regulations against that, and many cities are doing their best to treat this, to avoid that. So the traditional design is building giant tanks and tunnels underground to hold the stormwater until it stops raining and then gradually release that to the wastewater treatment plant. The problem with that is extremely costly. It's cost billions of dollars. And you also don't, like from a citizen's perspective, you don't really see that much benefit except for no sewage in the water, in rivers, which is important. There's an alternative, which is some examples as shown here. I still, this picture from Georgetown University, is we can use nature or nature-based solutions, or we call green infrastructure in relationship to gray, to capture and treat the water where it falls. So imagine just city roofs in Manhattan. If they were all covered by green, by sedums, plants, then we will be able to avoid tons and tons of stormwater going into our combined systems and greatly reduce that overflow. So cities actually paying property owners to host green infrastructure like this. At the same time, the uptake can be fairly low. So as an example, New York City, very wealthy, the city has set aside $500 million to pay private property owners to host these green infrastructure. It will cover the design, construction costs. And over the past 5 years, they were only able to commit 15 million. Just because the programs there are many challenges. And some of them are listed in your handouts. And I want to flag that many of you who are familiar with behavior economics are probably used to problems that trying to influence actions that many people take on a daily basis or over many times, like how do you get people to brush their teeth more or save more for their retirement? This is somewhat different. Obviously, we could, there are, say, individual homeowners, if you have a backyard, you can do like this downspout disconnect at the bottom left-hand side. But for the biggest bang for the buck, for the lowest cost per acre, it's usually the larger properties that are most useful. Like if you have a big green roof, or if you have a large, say, parking lot that can be converted, where the stormwater on the parking lot can be converted, treated. So these decisions are made by a few people, say like the top 10 developers in the city, and these are very deliberate decisions. So that's the context, and you can read more on the challenges, like the specific challenges, like sometimes the programs are not very user-friendly, like it can be cumbersome for the application process, and sometimes developers might think, oh, it's going to slow down my my construction schedule if I add these new components. Sometimes their stormwater engineers are not familiar with this it's relatively new, maybe like 10 years, these green infrastructure designs. So yeah, so what can we do? And I'm advising the city of Buffalo on how to design their next generation of green infrastructure program. I just had a call with the program manager early this afternoon and talked about actually tonight. And he was very excited that we'll hopefully get some really cool ideas. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Nina. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly introduce the panel, and then we'll go from my right to left with like maybe 2 or 3 minutes observations, ideas, suggestions, however you like. So I'll just do introductions first. So first here is Annie Duke. She's an author, professional speaker, decision strategist, philanthropist, and most importantly, previous behavioral economics NYC speaker. Yeah. Her latest book, Thinking in Bets, is literally a game changer. I loved it. I recommend it. I think there's some for the winners.
There are.
Yeah. Yeah. So bonus. She's an MA in cognitive psychology from Penn. To her left is Carolyn Bauer. She's the manager of the Service Design Studio at the Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity, where she works with nonprofits, city agencies, and design firms on projects in the built environment. She's a certified urban planner with a master's in urban planning from Columbia. To her left is Liz Smith. She's the lead scientist in social science and economics for the New York division of the Nature Conservancy, and is a multi-dimensional explorer of the people-nature connection at the intersection of infrastructure, community resilience, and policy. All the bios tonight, I have to take like multiple breaths to get through. She has a PhD in environmental and natural resource economics. And then we have Erin Sherman, who's a newly minted VP, congratulations, at Ideas 42, where she focuses on civic engagement and incorporating resilience, adaptation, and environmental justice perspectives into environmental work. She's got a degree in psychology, a certificate in environmental studies from Princeton. So let's welcome our panelists. Okay, so one by one. So Annie, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I'll just quickly say, as you're sort of thinking about it, I think that we tend to think about sort of the things that we might do versus the things that we don't do. So I would encourage you not just to think about, say, nudges, but think about sludge as well. I think that sludge is really important. So sludge. So sludge is the opposite of a nudge. It's something which creates friction between the person actually executing something. So, for example, there's a lot of data from India that shows they have like this really great free healthcare in India that's available particularly for widows, but the paperwork is like ridiculous. So it's a free thing. I mean, like here, the city's going to give you something free. They're going to put this pretty thing on your roof. So in India, they'll give you this free healthcare, but people really don't take advantage of it because there's too much sludge. So another example of sludge would be voter ID laws as a way to create sludge, right? So it's just like some sort of barrier that doesn't, like you got something free coming to you. You don't have to pay for it. It's just you sort of have to pay with the stuff that you have to do. So I would just like, as you're thinking about solutions, don't just think about how do you encourage people to do it, but how do you not discourage people from doing something by creating friction between the thing you want them to do and the them. So that would be my 2 cents.
So about removing barriers?
It's a set. Yeah, it's like you can think about it. It's a way that you, and a lot of times it's unintentional that the barrier is raised. Like just filling out a form is a little bit sludgy, right? So if to do something, I have to be able to bring my birth certificate. Right, and maybe I just don't have a birth certificate at home, so now I have to get this paperwork and I have to come and do this. And even though you're going to give me a free thing, I don't do it because I got to go do this other thing. So it's how do we make sure that we don't have unintentional barriers in the process that and sometimes they're done intentionally. I just want to say that, but I assume in this case the barriers are probably unintentional. So I would just think about that.
I love the idea of sludge. I'm going to borrow that. I feel like my whole job is fighting sludge.
There you go. Please use sludge. It's not my thing, by the way. Like Thaler uses it a lot, and I didn't make that word up. I just want to make it clear. I give credit to the Nobel Prize winner.
Well, tonight you get the credit for it. Sort of building off of that idea, I would think about somebody's entire journey of putting up a green infrastructure system, what's going to entice them, what's going to continue to engage them, and then what if they want to exit? Think about all pieces of that puzzle. I think that's a lot of times programs roll out without thinking about a holistic solution. I also want to emphasize that if we're focusing on big private developers, maybe since we live in a city where diversity is the health of the city, we should be thinking about other scales of property owners and other kinds of non-residential condo establishments. That might be.
Yeah, I want to clarify that it's not just developers, even though they are like the easier example to give, but also large institutions or churches. And definitely for in thinking about diversity and inclusion, the smaller scales, like in your backyard, you can put things up like that, which also is very valuable. And at the same time, with limited resources, for the biggest bang for the buck from like the sewer authority's perspective, focusing on, well, actually, I think it's easier to use nudge for the smaller, like 10,000 homeowners. I think it's harder for the 50 largest landowners in a city. So that's why I picked the large landowners to give you that challenge.
Oh, okay. So it's actually harder for the bigger developers to do this type of work because of the scale?
My limited understanding for behavior economics or behavior science, I think it's harder to nudge them because these are very deliberate, like $100,000 jobs or projects. It's not like a $10 that you can
tank
nudge
in your backyard. Yeah.
Right. So how can we apply behavior science to these kind of big projects, big decisions?
Yeah. I think oftentimes, sometimes policies are thought through the eyes of larger developers or larger influencers. And so I think there's real power in thinking about the smaller actors. So I would encourage people to think through that lens. So I guess to sum it up, think about diversity of scale and think about the entire journey.
Love this. It's fun being in the middle. Nina, I want to clarify. There isn't a specific audience. It's not just big developers only.
No.
Okay. I'm not going to make you say more. So I had the good fortune of being at the Behavioral Summit today. And if you don't know what that is, you should Google it. It's worth checking out. But what I heard over and over again, like my big takeaway was audience, decision, barrier. So who's your audience? What's the decision they have to make? And what are the barriers that they face? Just setting up a conceptual frame to think through what those decisions might be, and then figuring out as what stands in their way, what are the levers or what's the behavioral science say that we might be able to lean in on, when whether that's nudges or financial incentives or social norms or providing more knowledge. What we have seen over and over again is that it is often not only one lever or framework that works. So yes to financial incentives, but what about social norms? I worked on, in a more applied academic sense, working with how we got farmers to change decisions about harvesting their crops to let little birds have their spawning season. And it was interesting because we had communities buying in to auctions to help pay off these farmers, but people got stickers of these little birds, little bobolinks, if you know what little bobolinks are. They're these pretty yellow and black birds. And so there were communities up in New England where all these folks have these stickers on their cars, and it became this identity, like a social identity, where people would be beeping at each other as they're going down the block, like, hey, you've got the sticker. And so it's just another, do I think that is the only mechanism? No. But there are many to think about, and you might want to think about many at once.
Great. A lot has been said already. I wanted to double down on make it easy, remove friction and sludge for sure. And that works especially well if you think folks' intentions are good. Like they really like the idea of installing this infrastructure, but the sludge is like getting in their way, making them procrastinate or get hung up on a step. What do you do if people don't already have this intention? or this sort of affinity for this action. Especially if you're talking about businesses, that's kind of a spot that behavioral economics doesn't yet have a lot to say about that. I would think about a few different principles that we think about in the individual nudging space that are sort of positively framed and how they might apply to businesses. So how would installing this infrastructure reflect on an identity of the property owner, or make them feel pride, or make their employees feel pride? And what would it do for their reputation? Speaking a bit to the idea of a social norm. Norms. What do I mean by identity? A lot, maybe. But so people like to reflect on themselves positively, right? We all like to, at the end of the day, sort of feel good about ourselves. And the groups to whom we belong, or the social signals we put out, can help us feel that positive identity. And one of the kind of magic things about identity that many types of nudges don't really get you is that one good action begets another. We feel motivated to remain consistent with an identity we've expressed in the past. So if we do something and we're paid for it, we might think, I did it for the money. If we do something and we are either paid a trivial amount or weren't paid at all, we will make up a story about how we are the kind of person who does that through the process of cognitive dissonance, or another theory, depending on what you subscribe to. But long story short, if you can encourage someone to see themselves a certain way and then encourage them to double down on that identity, sometimes it can get you places that more financial incentives cannot.
I just want to add one thing from what you guys said. Don't just think about how to encourage the business owner, because sometimes you can just imagine the business owner is like, I just want to make the most money. So you might want to focus on a smaller unit, which is the people who are going to consume whatever the business owner is offering. So you might be able to kind of ignore the owner of the building and think about the people who are going to be occupants of the building. Because if they demand that, if they're willing to pay a premium, for example, for a building that has this, or they won't go, they prefer to be in buildings that have it or whatever, then, eventually then there's a market for organic food because people want it. So it's just another way to think about it. Don't necessarily think about it as top down. Also think about it as bottom up.
Okay, we actually have time for maybe one or two quick questions for the panel.
Regarding the product offerings, I see that there's different versions up there as we think about sort of the choice architecture that we present to the buyers during the buying process. I could see something potentially happening in terms of the grades or tiers as it relates to investment. Can you speak just to some of the solutions up there really briefly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to make it harder for you, let's not look at the simplest solution, which is a downspout disconnect or a rain barrel. But look at the bigger ones, like a green roof, or converting part of, say, the a parking spot into a bioswale, like the top right. You can also do pervious pavements, like the bottom right. And these tend to be above $10,000 to $1 million projects. And also, New York City is not really the right landscape to think about it because we have so limited space, but more thinking like Queens or like Buffalo, where you do have more on the ground space where you can put in this.
Any more burning questions before we break up? Yes.
I understand that there was legislation proposed to make this a mandate that developers and anyone doing significant work on their roof would have to do this. I was just wondering, I don't really know if that's still in process, if anyone has an update on that. And then
yeah, so the green roof legislation is just for New York City, while many places like Buffalo does not have a pending legislation like that. So that what many cities do is they will pay for the design construction of the project, while still the uptake is fairly low. So if also think about Buffalo, like for example, it's a city that's not experiencing a whole lot of new development or redevelopment. So you are most likely you will be retrofitting existing properties.
All right, so now it's time to kind of hear what you all came up with.
All right. So for group one, we felt like awareness was a big barrier for folks understanding the tax abatement program and the grant program, and awareness around the CSO problem. I don't think everyone in the city yet understands the severity of the CSO problem and the amount of sewage in our waterways. So certainly education and outreach programs would have to be part of building awareness of the reason for all of us getting involved in managing stormwater better. So education is certainly one part of it. And then we also felt like the programs themselves need some adjustments. The tax abatement program doesn't yet fully cover the costs that someone actually incurs when they put a green roof on their building. And so the legislation that is being proposed right now by, I think, Levin and another council member is suggesting that that price that for the rebate be increased from $4.50 per square foot, which is what it is now, to $15 per square foot. That's what they feel the threshold is for people to, for the taxpayers to agree to this rebate program. So certainly the tax abatement program needs to be improved. With the grant program, there is a lot of sludge. I love that I've learned a new word tonight and get to use it this way. But the paperwork is extremely complicated. The grant, they call it a grant program, but the person installing the green roof has to pay out first. They get reimbursed for their expenses. And so I think there's some fear and anxiety around, you know, will I actually get reimbursed? What does this process look like? So one of the recommendations that we had for that was to have a facilitator who is someone that comes in and sits down with the building owner or the property owner or the developer, whomever it may be, who's going to apply for this grant, help them get the paperwork filled out so that it's just as easy as possible. And then another thing that we thought about was with the grant program that some of the monies certainly are going to go to cover the cost to install the roof, but the green roof or the bioswale or rain garden, whatever the idea is that the person wants to accomplish. But then also some of those grant monies goes to maintenance, because maintenance is such a big barrier.
Nice job. Group two.
Hey, so I've done lightning talks, but never 2.5 minutes. Let's see. We had a long list of ideas, so there's no time to explain. I'll sum up, to borrow from a movie. Anybody get the reference? No. Anyway, so we really took the idea of sludge to heart and frictionless, and that ran as a thread through a lot of the ideas. And some of the key ones that came out were a facilitator to help with the paperwork, but also we talked about targeted outreach, especially for high value properties or things that would be a big capture, like large landowners, something like Columbia University, talk to them about their properties. Full disclosure, I work for Columbia, so kind of axe to grind there. But we also talked about providing either turnkey solutions, you know, scaled right GI solutions that are essentially sold. So you've got a roof this size, you can put this type of bioswale, and here's the nice pretty picture that makes it, shows how it's going to look better than your existing roof. And the case studies that quantify, you know, increases in rent or whatever like that, some of those apparently exist, and providing access for those would be quite useful. Refer to my notes. What else do we have? Oh, right, certification. So some, especially larger companies, are looking for LEED certification or other environmental certification. So you can get the green roof badge, and that can be credit towards LEED certification or other environmental certifications. So that makes a lot of sense. And then we had, the opt-in versus opt-out, right? So right now it's very difficult to opt in. This was a good suggestion on, even if it's at the building level where the developers already tried to do it, but the residents have to buy in, you know, if you opt in, you just have to sign. If you want to opt out, if you want to object, then you have to fill out the paperwork and explain why you should not do the green roof. So the default being a green roof in a new development or a building that wants to approve it. Yeah. That's, I think, did I miss anything big? I think that's good. Cool.
Great.
So I'm going to talk quickly. We wanted to really come up with a behavioral strategy. So we really thought about it in 3 parts. Number 1 is the awareness issue. So how do we create salience through the right timing of the message, the messenger, for example. The second part is really the kind of the content of the message, like why, how do we reframe it? And the third part is really around the choice architecture, where I'm ready to commit, but just make it easy for me or convincing. So the first part was it has to be timed around when people do budgeting. When this is a really big ticket item, this is not something they're going to do outside of a budgeting process. So how do we target condo boards when they're doing their budgeting or when developers do their budgeting and time it then? Can we target like number 1 seeded properties within a particular neighborhood where they become kind of the influencer for the neighborhood? People want to be like them, and kind of use that influence for other people to follow. And with that, they could talk about the benefits of how their property value increased, and so there's a benefit for the whole neighborhood and individual properties. We talked a bit about a messenger. Who's really going to these people and talking about it? Is it? I mean, you could have like a Leonardo DiCaprio if who doesn't want to listen to him. But think about who's delivering the message. How can we use landscapers, because they go in, they do their spring budget. They're already planning this. There could be a benefit or incentive for them putting this in. It could be something that becomes a default within their I can't think of it when they give you the options for when you want to buy. Also, if you're at the local park and you can have a sign that says this lake was contaminated by 5% by raw sewage, and that becomes oh my gosh, I have to do something about it. Then the content. How do we reframe the value? So you can use these green areas for your dogs, meditation, herb gardens. How do you tie like a sustainability rating around it? So my property, if we do this, it means I am green. It's kind of a must-have feature. So every building wants to have this. That's also kind of around social norms. You don't want to be left out. How do you frame the benefit from a taxpayer? So taxpayers, you're paying X amount of money for cleaning up with the raw sewage. By adopting this, you won't have that. And then there were some choice architecture things that we can do, but we don't have time. So.
All right, so a lot of what we talked about has already been kind of covered, but I'll touch on some of the stuff that hasn't. Got this super high fidelity visual for you to look at while I'm talking. So yeah, we talked a lot about incentives, a lot about social norms. The one part that I'll add in that I haven't heard yet, because I've seen projects like this coming out of Pittsburgh and Portland and stuff like that, is the actual like leveraging of open data portals by actually like putting sensors and high fidelity cameras and like in existing green infrastructure to sort of start tracking and getting visualizations out there, whether that's through like actual research institutions or like private companies that can help with providing visualization of like what actually happens when storms and people and stuff goes through this actual infrastructure, which we haven't really talked a lot about what actually happens when this stuff is in place or like how it actually improves the landscape. So providing visualizations on that, as well as like external scales, like on Zillow or like something similar to Yelp that would actually provide negative like feedback on buildings that like weren't doing this. So for like tenants that were looking for like a new apartment, can you go on Zillow and see that like this building that you're looking at has like a 2 out of 5 like green rating or something. So kind of like providing the certifications like you're talking about, but also kind of the negative like reputational aspects that can kind of get baked in. In addition to kind of like tiered levels of certification. Thank you so much for holding this, by the way. It's like really hero. Where you have kind of like incentives bundled together. So like landowners can pick sort of like a tier. Okay, can I create like a little green infrastructure and get like a little bit of benefit, or like a level 2 and get more like benefit if you're like can eventually get payoffs for the like higher level payoffs, like tax cuts or something like that, like further down the line, that maybe you can bundle it together into, okay, now you have to make a commitment to create like even more infrastructure. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, hi, Group 5 here. We have what's sort of written back here on the board. I won't go into too much detail about it. There've already been a lot of really good suggestions thrown out there, obviously. We realized right away, as I think most groups did, that this is a really hard problem, and pretty much no matter what path you follow down, there's going to be plenty of reasons to say that it won't work. But ultimately, we kind of decided to focus on what we could do with developers who are, or those who are in control of the large amounts of land. We looked at what drives the profit that they have, right? The biggest incentive that they're likely to have when it comes to making any decision, especially on this scale. What we focus a lot on is like how cheap or how easy can we make this change for them? How can we lower the cost in terms of dollars? And how can we lower the cost in terms of time and get rid of the sludge so that it's easier? One thing that we did come up with on that side, or that we focused on, was working with the partners on both the construction and the maintenance side. So who is it that they're ultimately going to be working with, and in what way can we have them help themselves to find these building owners proactively and work with them and get them to convince that this is beneficial for all sides. Meanwhile, though, on the more revenue side, how is it that these owners are getting their money? They're being paid by individuals living within or signing leases within these buildings. So how can we start then a grassroots movement, pun intended, to get people from the inside to push up and say that we want this change? And ultimately what we thought was the most unique and possibly viable solution is to find key individuals in these buildings that are really passionate about this. So who are the people that we can go to on the inside who can then be the champions from within, and who we can arm with all of these other ideas that we've gotten throughout the night and push them on their own to the others living in or inhabiting the building.
Excellent. Great job. Okay, so we got Group 1 with education, outreach, facilitators. Group 2 with also outreach and facilitators, but looking at LEED certifications and the opt-out idea. Group 3 with kind of a kitchen sink sort of everything in the nudge book. Group 4 with salience and a content choice architecture, et cetera, et cetera. Group 4 with the open data and visualizations and negative feedback or maybe certification. And then Group 5 with ways to lower the cost and time by working with the right people and finding champions in each building. So it's now time for Nina and Jen at the Nature Conservancy to consult with our panel of experts. So which team has provided the most useful and original and actionable suggestions that you all can take in your work to get more people, to help the city get more people to take up on this opportunity?
Yeah, so we heard a lot of great ideas from all the 5 teams, and really grateful for being here. Also thank all the panelists, and thank Brad, Mike, Noreen for organizing this whole thing. So after much discussion, we decided to pick Team 4. It was a hard decision. There were just a lot of good ideas, and we appreciated talked about incentives and so on, but also the idea of integrating Zillow with the features with Zillow, having like high fidelity cameras to show things and have different tiers of incentives that people can choose from. So I think, yeah, these are great things to think about. And I want to say that there are other teams, like Team 3 has a lot of the good ideas that we also want to incorporate. And obviously, rules and regulations is hugely important, and paying the full cost, obviously, is still hugely important. And there are times when you pay the full cost, people are still not coming. So that's really what we are trying to solve for hearing from you. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer Chin. I'm the Director of Conservation Innovation here in the New York chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And we just wanted to thank you again for being here today and offering all of your expertise and ideas to this project. If for whatever reason you want to continue to be involved in our work on stormwater or have anything else that you would like to offer to us, we're always open to hearing your advice, and we hope that this will be the first of many other events where we can invite the public into our space to help us sort of co-design these solutions to the problems that we know are very, very pressing for our planet today. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you again to the Behavioral Economics Meetup for everything that you've done and for really diving into this with us. It's been great. And thank you especially to our panelists who have very graciously given us their time today and their expertise. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Clicksuasion. Subscribe to the podcast, read our research, and get in touch with us at clicksuasion.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @Clicksuasion.